Hey everybody, Harv here. Let's start chapter 22, our last chapter in AP Euro. So this chapter, we're going to talk about, current trends when it comes to women, European politics, society, and really kind of delve into modern Europe, today in the 21st century. So one of the biggest things that happened in Europe, recently is the creation of the European Union. Now, there's a lot been going on with the European Union. We had Brexit recently with Great Britain exiting the European Union, but the creation of the Eurozone, the creation of the euro, the common currency for many countries within the European Union is a big thing. And the European Union really is important, and we're going to get into that because it really shows the political, the cultural, the social, and economic connection of not only Western Europe, but Central Europe and parts of Eastern Europe, and it has expanded. And because the European Union has been expanding and more members have been joining within Europe, that's been a source of tension with the East, especially with Russia, Vladimir Putin's Russia. During the 20th century and during the 21st century, there's been a lot of movement within European society. There's been some huge changes demographically, on an urban level, and we're going to get into that. One of the big sources of continuity within the 20th century and 21st century is the continuing urbanization of Europe. 75% of Western Europe lives in cities. The majority of people in, I would say, Western and Central Europe are in urban areas. Eastern Europe is, as we know, kind of behind, but slowly catching up, and there's continuing urbanization with that in those areas. But because of World War II and because of the Cold War, there was a lot of displacement of people. A lot of demographic changes, and we're going to get into that and talk about this displacement and movement and some of the demographic changes of the 20th century. World War II was demographically a catastrophe for Europe, and there was a huge displacement of millions of people. We saw millions of people move into Germany for slave labor as the Nazis, took conquered people and simply brought them into Germany. Brought them in and took French to Poland to work in camps, the Poles to Germany. There was a huge forced migration of people in World War II. We saw Jews, Soviets, Germans, people in the Balkans, people in the Baltics. There was a lot of displacement and a lot of huge changes in Europe because of World War II. Something that's really interesting to see is that lots of prisoners of war from Russia did not want to go back. Many people in Eastern Europe, during the Iron Curtain are going to want to try to get out. But World War II and the Cold War, there were some serious demographic changes, serious changes when it came to migration and people. Also, something really important for us to talk about with World War II and the Cold War is the changes in borders. Because the map, yet again, and we've known this ever since we started this class, that the map of Europe has changed so much. The map, yet again, with World War I, with World War II is going to change, and many nationalities are going to be uprooted. Many people are going to be living in different countries. A good example of that is in Germany. You're going to see many Germans now living in Poland. You're going to see many, groups in, the newly created Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and these are countries that were created after World War I. The map yet again is going to change. Between 1945 and 1960. About 500,000 Europeans are going to leave Europe annually, and this is, due to various fears, various sources. Governments will actually encourage this migration due to economic constraints, cultural changes in borders, boundaries. So Europeans are going to be leaving, and they're going to be leaving all over the world: the United States, Africa, they're gonna be going to various parts of the world. Decolonization is gonna lead many people to leave colonies and return to their homeland. For example, we're gonna see Great Britain receive lots of people from India, Africa, the Caribbean. France is gonna see a huge influx of people from Algeria, from Indochina. So decolonization is also going to facilitate migration as well, but back into Europe. Now, with so much movement and this movement of people, you're going to see a lot of tensions arise with immigration, and this is obviously something that we're seeing today in the United States. Immigration is a huge issue and has created a lot of tension, racial tension, within the United States, which is something terrible. But you're going to see many extreme right-wing groups, conservative groups, run on this fear of immigration, these racial tensions. In Europe, these are racial tensions between African immigrants, Middle Eastern immigrants, and you're going to see that. And you're going to see many groups. Jean-Marie Le Pen, he was a French politician who ran for power in France in the early 2000s, and this was one of his big platforms. Is he was running on a platform of anti-immigration. But there's going to be a lot of racist movements arise in Europe. We're seeing that in the United States as well. A huge uptick in hate crimes, in very anti-immigrant rhetoric, and that's something that we're seeing in the West right now. And part of that is for immigration from Latin America, immigration from the Middle East. But immigration has really been a very divisive issue in the world, in the United States and in Europe. And one group that has been targeted with immigration, and one group that has really been a part of this is Muslim populations, and we've seen a lot of Muslim population groups immigrate to Europe, immigrate to the United States because of so much of the wars, the various Afghanistan wars, Iraqi war, the Persian Gulf War, the Syrian Civil War. There's been a huge exodus of refugees and immigrants from the Middle East, and they've been going to more stable areas such as Europe, such as the United States. And this is the Muslims have been scapegoated and have been with these huge arrival of Muslim immigrants. That's caused some serious racial and religious tensions in Europe and in the United States and in the West as a whole. Okay. Europe and the United States have always, suffered from misinformation and a misunderstanding of the Middle East. Remember, this goes way back to, the age of exploration. This goes way back to when Europe was interacting with the Middle East. Well, remember, much of the source of Europe when it came to the Middle East was from Christian missionaries, right, who obviously were very biased and did not, they viewed Islam as a rival religion. And therefore, in order to make sure that people did not convert to this rival religion, they gave it a much, negative meaning and a negative, very much promoted negative viewpoints of Islam. But during Ottoman times, there was few migration, but that that's going to change, and we're going to see immigration of Muslims into Europe. Come from two chief sources. One is we're going to see European economic growth. There's going to be labor shortages, and that's going to lead to some European nations to invite guest workers to their country. So there's going to be an economic incentive for Muslims to come into Europe. Decolonization, that's definitely a big one. But also, and one that I did not write down here, was war and the instability of the Middle East. And that's going to lead to a mass exodus of migrants to, as I stated before, more stable areas. Muslim immigrants, for the most part, remain very unassimilated and self-contained. The Muslim immigrants very much, tried to keep their culture, keep their religion, keep their faith. And what's really important is that European Muslims are not all the same. You have some Sunnis, you have some Shiites. There's different viewpoints when it comes to Islam. You have some wealthy Islamic immigrants, Muslim immigrants. You have some, lower income. Some of them come from different countries. You have, Syrians, Iranians, Iraqi. A lot of them, Saudi Arabian. There's a lot of. They're also coming from different parts of the Middle East as well. As I stated before, they're going to find themselves as a target of politicians as scapegoats, something that they're really going to take over from the Jews. And remember, the Jews have been the traditional scapegoats of Europe, and we're going to see Muslims kind of take on that mantle in more recent times. Okay, and the rise of radical Islam has led to severe tensions within Europe, and obviously the Muslim Islamic population is kind of caught right in the middle of that, and you see people, and this happens in the United States as well, but in the middle of Europe, and migrants from the Middle East, being blamed, being called, terrible, racial slurs, and scapegoated by, not just the European population, but by other Western cultures as well. You have today Europe really trying to control their Muslim populations. You have Europe and right-wing groups, really trying to stop immigration, and to there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear when it comes to some of these Muslim populations, and that part of that is because of the rise of radical Islamic groups and terrorism. But Europe has and the United States as well has a large Muslim population today. When it comes to demographics, and the birth rate, Europe's birth rate has been dropping for the most part. Sources state that the United States by 2050 might have more people than Europe as a whole. Europe also has a very aging population. The United States does too, with the baby boomer generation, the generation that occurred right after World War II. But Europe has has an aging population that has put great stress on the economy with its welfare system and benefits, partly because, well, if you have a lot of people, receiving so many benefits, from the state, and you don't have enough people working to be able to, provide and, help finance this, welfare system and this, a lot of the social programs, that makes, things really tough for an economy. But Europe has, and especially with COVID-19, Europe has a lot of issues with their aging population, and how to pay for some of the healthcare and how to pay for some of the unemployment, and some of the social programs. And let's talk about what a welfare state society means. Now, today in the United States, there's really a negative connotation when it comes to welfare. There's some general misunderstandings of what welfare is. Welfare is state support. When you receive financial assistance, health assistance, some social assistance from the state. Now, during the second half of the 20th century, Western Europe is going to have a lot of economic growth, and part of that reason is because of the Marshall Plan of the United States. Remember, the United States, because of containment, is going to inject millions and billions of dollars into the Western European economies in order to make sure that those governments are not only stable, but they're going to help them in their crusade of containment, right? So we're going to see at the same time, and I'm going to get to the these Christian democratic parties in a second, but Western Europe had a lot of unprecedented economic growth. Western Europe was, as they were going through this economic growth, they were trying to, continue to facilitate this new economic growth in the face of decolonization, and that was a huge challenge, because remember, traditionally for Europe, a lot of their economic, gain and a lot of their economic prosperity came from colonies, came from their vast empires. A good example of that is Great Britain, right? And so. That was a challenge. That's going to be a big challenge in the second half of the 20th century. Now, also in the second half of the 20th century, the West, at the urging and the leadership of the United States, was focused on constructing stable, liberal, democratic political, framework. And this was very specific, very direct, very how should I put it? It was on purpose, and the reason why they're doing this is to provide a different viewpoint from communism. So during the second half of the 20th century, you're going to see very stable democratic parties in France, in Germany, in Austria, and Italy that were progressive. They're going to promote democracy, promote capitalism, promote social reform, promote competition, economic growth, and in the spirit of the Cold War, promote anti-communism. It's important to remember that these democratic parties are going to be, really solidified in the late 20th century, definitely at the direction of the United States. But it's really important to remember that, a lot of these democratic parties had existed since the 19th century, but they just didn't hold power. For example, in Germany, there was a social democratic party, but it just didn't have power because OVB had power. All right, France, same thing, right? There were these specific parties, these democratic liberal parties, whether they were socialist, or a different ideology, but they were there. All right. One big change that we're going to start seeing at the second half of the 20th century is they're going to start allowing non-Catholic members. They're going to start allowing different religions to participate in the political process. Very important, so more inclusive with their religions. These democratic parties, these governments in Germany, in France, in Austria, in Italy, in Great Britain are going to work in conjunction with the United States in order to promote democracy, promote capitalism, promote economic growth, and promote anti-communism and work on containment within Europe. Now, something that's going to be really important is the creation of these welfare states and a lot of these social programs. And it's really important. Governments are going to start to spend more money on social welfare than the military. Can anybody tell me why? Well, talking to a screen, just kind of pause and think about it for a second. Why? Well, the reason why is because the military is going to start to go away. Why? Well, the United States is kind of Europe's military now. All right? So these governments are going to, in the face of decolonization, they're going to lose a lot of revenue. But at the same time, they're going to cut costs as well because they're going to kind of switch up their military spending. All right? And they're going to decrease that. So they're going to have more money available for social programs. All right, and a lot of this is a reaction to the wars of the 20th century. We're going to see, governments be like, a good way for us to prevent war is maybe just not have these giant militaries that we can just, rattle our sabers and be like, all right, here we go. We'll just throw our army at you. All right. Prior to World War II, and we know this, only Germany and Britain at the, guidance of OVB, and for Britain, Disraeli and Gladstone, really offered a lot of social benefits, social insurance, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. All right. After the World War II, we're going to see this concept of social insurance start to change as a social right and should be a right to all. Then the United States is kind of going through this right now. We've seen Obamacare, but in the 2020 election, right, Bernie Sanders and you have some really more liberal thinkers like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren trying to promote Medicare for all, free college. And so the United States is kind of having this dilemma and discussion amongst its population right now. But after, World War II, this is going to, become a model followed in Europe. Beveridge, he was a British thinker. He believed specifically that medical care, pensions, benefits should be available to all, and that there should not have to be a redistribution of income, that you don't have to, necessarily make everybody equal like in communism, but you can provide these social and affordable social programs to help people. Britain is going to become the first welfare state under the Labour Party's Attlee, and he is going to create the National Health Service after World War II, which is Great Britain's more modern healthcare system. France and Germany are going to follow suit in the 1970s. And you're going to see a lot of these countries, and I'll go back to the slide, a lot of these countries, start to, have affordable healthcare, state-provided healthcare. That's what Obamacare and Medicare for All is. It's healthcare provided by the state, provided by a country, paid for by the country. And so you're going to start to see this become more of the norm within Europe, along with other social programs. Now, we're going to see some resistance to this. And I want to talk about kind of the economic fluctuation in Europe since World War II. You had Reconstruction for about 5 years. In the 50s and 70s, at the kind of facilitated by the Marshall Plan, a lot of economic growth. In the 70s to the 90s, there was, periods of growth, but also periods of unemployment, kind of, the economy is going up and down. And this had to do with, parts of the Cold War, events around the world. And after that, we've had the financial crises, recovery, but then you also had the Great Recession of 2008, and then now in 2020, right, the whole world is kind of trying to figure out what are we going to do with this COVID-19, because it's been by shutting down countries, the economies, it's been disastrous for a lot of people and their income, and it's been really tough on economies, and so we're waiting to see whether the world kind of plunges into another Great Depression, or if countries can stabilize the economies in the world markets. During the first phases from 45 to the 70s, Keynesian economics ruled. Remember, Keynesian economics are where the government intervenes in the economy, and the government helps facilitate growth by running deficits and spending a lot of money. But after that, we're going to see kind of the pendulum swing a little bit, and we're going to see more conservatism come about in the 1970s. We're going to start to see neoconservatives, and we're going to start to see, many thinkers, and we're going to get, and one of the best examples of this is Margaret Thatcher. She was a British conservative prime minister. I believe she was the first female prime minister in Great Britain. But she was a conservative prime minister who wanted to make the economy more efficient and competitive through the privatization of industries, and she was trying to, defund some of the social programs and, reinvigorate the economy with pure capitalism. And she was a conservative. And so she, she wanted to, cut some of this welfare state and some of this assistance because it cost a lot of money, it raised taxes, and so she ran against that, and she was a big proponent on privatizing healthcare, privatizing industries, and not having so much state provided assistance and social programs. So and that's really important. And today in Europe and in the United States, we see that battle of whether it's fair to tax the wealthy, whether it's fair to or what's more efficient, having state-run healthcare or private healthcare, private colleges or state-run colleges. So this is a battle that's going on all around the world, and we've seen this tug of war going on for quite a while. Europe right now, faced with their low fertility rate, their high population of the elderly, it's really worrisome. And they have lower amounts of workers to take care of an aging population. How do they pay for some of these social benefits? How do they pay for healthcare? How do they pay for all these different programs, insurance? This is definitely worrisome. And with COVID-19 and with a looming economic depression, that makes it even more worrisome. Okay, and there's Margaret Thatcher. Okay, and this is there you go, the National Health Service in Great Britain. Okay, let's stop here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.